So we've asked Despi and Charity to share what they learned as they investigated the challenges and opportunities in the giant screen industry before our presenters share their advice. Please join me in welcoming Despi and Charity to the stage.
Thanks to Andy and Mark. Good morning. I'm Despi and Charity. I'm just kidding. I'm speaking first. We've got one mic up here. Despi is seated there. You'll get to hear from her in a moment. One of the greatest things about working on this project and this event was that the organizers get to learn too. Yay, when does that get to happen, right? We look forward to hearing these speakers just as much as you do. We know what they're planning to talk about, but getting the tips ourselves will be actually beneficial to all of us, so it's great. Before we get started on the day's program, we thought it would be a good idea to kind of share how this shindig came together. You know, what inspired the sessions that we selected and the topics? Why did we choose the speakers we chose? Despi and I wanted to make sure that you understood that, and so did the task force. Now, we've already established that everybody has a common goal. You want your theaters and your films to be successful. And that requires a lot of collaboration and communication and marketing efforts and strategies and visitor experience components to make all of that work. And we feel you're actually really lucky because you have an organization like GSCA who's there listening to you and the challenges you have or that you see or you fear are coming, and taking action to put together a professional development program focused on marketing, which rarely happens in the museum industry, and making it happen today. So I think they deserve a round of applause. So please. It's extraordinary. So it was our job as Museum Playbook to kind of figure out the why for this day, right? We are museum professionals, but not necessarily from the giant screen theater industry. So for us, it was a learning experience to help us form a program that would benefit you and your needs, and really identify opportunities to help you and speakers who can address those needs. The symposium lineup targets the specific things that we learned during our research and planning process, which is why you don't see things like where to place your TV ad next. It was not something that came up during the research phase. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to skip ahead. So how did we do that? So we wanted to learn about the industry a little bit more, but also begin to identify challenges and opportunities. And so we conducted a survey of all the members. So many of you participated in that survey back in May or June, whenever that went out. And then we talked to professionals at 5 locations, as Andy and Mark expressed, across North America. A variety of different markets, different types of theaters, different technologies even, different films that we're showing. And then also, while we were at those 5 locations, we took time to speak to visitors and observe their behavior, and then also watched what staff did with visitors as they arrived. Now, I can imagine that you spent a lot of time this week at the conference talking about content, maybe even content appropriate for different audiences and ages. But today's focus is really on you as professionals and what you're doing to reach out to those audiences, to share that content and make it available. And what we learned from you going through this process, I mean, I'm generalizing, obviously, we went to 5 sites, but we also looked at the survey data, and we identified some things that you're looking to do, right? You have a desire to reach new audiences, of course, drive repeat visitation. You want to compete and stand out among all of the other entertainment choices that your visitors have today, even on their phones. And you want to do it all on a limited budget, right? No pressure. So we set out to identify people, outsiders, if you will, to help address those issues. Okay, So while the purpose of the site visits was to inform our decision-making for this program today, we would feel remiss if we didn't share some of the things we learned from your visitors and from the experience of watching them on site at these locations. I'm going to present themes and trends we saw develop, particularly among the visitors. And the points I'm sharing are those that stood out to us as relevant to the entire field, right? So there may be things that we observed for the venue alone that is helpful to them. But there were some things that emerged that really are relevant to all. And that helped us, as we hoped, focus this program. So before I go to the next slide, I have a question for you. Quick show of hands. How many of you worry that visitors like to watch movies elsewhere? Theaters, their homes, more than they like to watch movies at your theaters? Raise your hands. Be honest. Okay. How many of you think that they prefer your theaters over others? Be honest if you think. Got a few hands. Okay, so we were with the majority of you, right? We were like, are we gonna find out that people don't like these theaters? You know, whew, how do you solve that, right? Guess what? They prefer the theaters over everywhere else that they watch movies, even in their homes, okay, which I personally find to be the most satisfying place to watch a movie. So I was thrilled to hear visitors say this. They had a great time. And of course they did, right? It wasn't just about the films that they were seeing. It was the overall experience and how it made them feel. The experience was exciting and immersive. You can take them places, and that's awesome. You can't do that at home, right? So we also know that in the museum field broadly, we understand that our visitors come to our museums for things that they can't do at home, right? That they can't do anywhere else. So your theaters match that description. Your theaters are an asset. There is one thing I want to point out, though. You'll note that while it was repeated by several visitors, it wasn't a priority for most of them to call the films or the experience in the theater family-friendly. They said exciting, immersive, felt like I was there, larger than life, right? They weren't saying family-friendly over and over again. They had a long list of things to choose from. And I feel like I just want to point that out because it is probably something we as museums tend to overuse, right? We want people to feel it's family-friendly because we see a lot of families in our museums, but maybe with the theaters, there's something a little bit more to work from, bite onto. Okay. Oops, let's see. I skipped 2 seconds. So, when did the visitors decide to visit? How many of them knew before they arrived that they would see a film? Now, raise your hand if you think the interviewees knew before they visited that they would see a film. We got left side, right side, 2 teams. Well, most of them did. Most of the visitors decided to visit the day of or the day before. But across the board, the majority knew that they were going to see a film in the theater when they arrived. Now, the one thing to note is that they did not always know what film they were going to see. They assumed they were going to go to that theater, right? So how did they learn about the film? It was your website and on-site. Those who planned to see a movie, so they arrived and they knew before they got there that they planned to see it, they were learning from things that existed on site, your staff and signs, et cetera. Many of them also looked at your website in advance, so they knew which movies were playing. For those who decided after arrival, the big focus was on signs and posters, and then staff, how they learned about the movies. There's an opportunity here because your websites, your signs, your posters, all of those things, your staff, they're all critical touch points for these visitors in their decision-making process. You can influence that. So only some of the participants in our particular interviews mention friends and family as a source of information for how they knew about the films or that they were going to see a film in the theater. It wasn't the majority, but I don't want to turn you away from that because of our number. There is data from 2014 that GSCA collected. You can probably not see it very easily on the screen, that a lot of the people who are visiting your museums in the particular age groups that are common, especially, are hearing about things from family and friends and are seeking information about movies that way or getting information about movies generally that way. So we still think word of mouth is a great opportunity for you. Okay, so looking at their broader decision-making process, we learned that, generally speaking, these same visitors Google, what's playing near me, movies near me, to try to decide what they're going to go see when they want to see a movie. Then they visit the websites for those theaters before they visit. Now, think about the process for the visitors who were going to your museum, right? Or they're going to these museums that we talked to. They had to actively pursue the museum first in order to get information about the theater. Currently, in the markets that we visited, and I would imagine a lot of your markets, if you search what's playing near me, your theaters are not showing up. We did this for the 5 locations, and it's normal, right? You have your science center is popular in other searches, but maybe your theater alone isn't mixed in with the list of theaters that are in the area that people might be searching for. The movies, the films themselves aren't listed in that way. So the average person in your market might be Googling what's playing near me, and the first movies that pull up are It and other things like that. And so they tend to assess what they're going to do based on that information. You can try it over lunch. Please don't start Googling during the talks this morning. But see what happens when you pull up what's going on. It's kind of a basic thing. In addition to the interviews, we observed visitors as they arrived at each of the locations. And our point for doing this was to kind of understand what's happening in that arrival process. Are they looking at signs? Are they talking to staff? Who are they talking to? What are they picking up? What's going on? You know, see if there are just any kind of common things that occur so that we could see if that would need to be part of the stay. We did notice that they show up with incomplete decisions. So, you know, we've talked about how the visitors said that they were often deciding on site through a variety of sources which film they were going to watch. So they might have known that they were going to watch a film, but they didn't know which one. And when they got there, they were making decisions based on a lot of input. So while only 21% of the visitors observed looked at signs, so in the overall information that we collected, those signs that they looked at happened to be the ones that were in the path of the visitor, the natural path, and they weren't like placed somewhere that was, had other distractions. So it was, that 21% happened to be a few signs that were very effective, and then everything else just wasn't looked at, all the things that we were tracking. When they arrived at the box office at these 5 locations, they were rarely offered the theater as an option for their visit. When prompted with questions, staff would respond with short but often incomplete answers, right? They've got a limited amount of time, and they're trying to answer the question and keep the line moving. So your website, staff, and signs help them make those final decisions. It's very important that those things are given thoughtful consideration as you're looking at your overall strategy for marketing and for visitor experience and the whole concept. What are you going to do with this film, this theater? You think about all of those things together. Okay, before I hand the mic to Despi, I want everyone in the room to take a deep breath. It's okay, all right? We are museum professionals, and we know a lot of these things are simple things to overlook, or in the grand scheme of where you spend your money, to forget, like it's part of the day, right? I don't know. It's an easy thing to overlook, and it's very common. A lot of museums are challenged with these things. And also, these things helped us identify opportunities that aren't necessarily expensive, right? There are solutions here, opportunities for you to make changes or experiments that are potentially low cost, not so time consuming, and kind of easy. So we were thrilled by that because for us, that meant that we could create a lineup today of people who are focused on those particular needs to help you boost attendance and things like that with some simple answers. So Despi is going to give you the rundown of how that all translates to the day.
Hi, everybody. As Charity mentioned, I am going to do that. This portion of the presentation is kind of like that time in your annual performance review where your boss looks at you and says, okay, these are your opportunities for growth. And everyone hates that part, so we drew straws, and I got to present that part. But this is much better than your annual performance review because you can react any way you want, right? You don't report to me. So you can boo and hiss like we're in British Parliament. I don't care. So feel free, whatever you got. Okay, so we're going to talk about how this research and what we found turned into opportunities that will lead or guide the day. The first thing, we invited Colleen Dillenschneider to be with us here today, and unfortunately she had a scheduling conflict, but the reason that we really wanted to include her is because she is a professional that's focused on data-driven insights related to museums and related institutions. She works for a company called Impacts Research and Development and has a really popular blog called Know Your Own Bone, and if you don't know it, you should really check it out. There's a lot of really great research they're doing about audience engagement, the changing landscape of audience for museums and science centers and other types of institutions. This particular video that we're going to show you is a piece that she put together specifically about how as cultural executives, as museum professionals, we often have blind spots that develop because we're such experts in our industry. And so how can we be aware of those so that we can dive deeper into the problems that we need to solve to better engage audiences? So we're going to play this short little video.
As it turns out, cultural professionals are not great at thinking like regular visitors. And that's not a bad thing, it makes perfect sense. But what is a bad thing is not knowing that insider professionals often have skewed perspectives. You're watching Know Your Own Bone, Fast Facts for Cultural Executives. I'm Colleen Dillenschneider. If you work for a cultural organization, then you probably know more than the average person about the organization's content area. You might know your mission verbatim, the areas in which your organization is struggling, the goals that it's trying to achieve, and you may even know many of the awesome people working hard to achieve those goals. But you know what visitors generally don't know? All of those things. And it's staff knowledge of those things that tends to create an organization's biggest blind spots. This leads to two big problems. The first is a psychological phenomenon called confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is the tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information in a way that confirms one's pre-existing beliefs or hypotheses. It's human, and it's also pretty damaging. Here's just one example. We know that broadly publicized reduced admission days result in attendees with more education and higher household incomes than regular admission days. As a side, this makes perfect sense. Our general audiences tend to be more wealthy and educated than the general public, so it's wealthy folks who take up on the deal when our initiatives aren't specifically targeted. Confirmation bias makes us think that our organization is exempt from this well-proven finding because we saw someone who looked low income, whatever that means, on an affordable access day when we were looking for them. The second reason why misunderstanding the limits of insider perspectives holds organizations back is that it reinforces traditional inside-out operations. It comes from our assumption that we know more about our audiences than they know about themselves, and that we get to decide what matters to them. It should be the other way around. To succeed, we need to operate from the outside in. In a world increasingly run by data, the cultural industry remains largely an I think industry. When we I think solutions and take them to I think insider experts, We have a whole lot of ideas and thinking and guessing from people who aren't our target audiences. If we really want to know what's going on, we have to ask. Don't get me wrong, it's a good thing that professionals know what is going on inside of their offices. It's their jobs. But it's also their job to remember that knowing these things affects how they see their world. And now you're in the know. Thanks so much for watching. For more information, head on over to Know Your Own Bone.
So the main idea is that because we live in this space every day, we end up with confirmation bias. And it is a tricky thing because we need all of you to be experts in this field. We need your experience, we need your ideas, we need the things that only you know, but also those things can sometimes cause us to forget that visitors don't know any of those things, and those aren't necessarily visitor priorities, right? So the visitor priority is sometimes very different than whatever our institutional priority is, and it can cause us to have goals that aren't very well aligned with their goals, and that can lead to not being where they are when we need to market to them. It can lead to not choosing the right message when we're talking to them. And so if we're aware of it, if we can keep it in mind as a potential problem, then we can constantly be asking ourselves to look back to what the visitor's question is and what the visitor need is that we're solving for. And then we can bring our experience and our knowledge that only we have to solve that problem, right? And start from that place. Okay, so today I'm going to talk you through some of the big themes that we identified as tools that we heard from you that you need, or ideas that you want to better understand, strategies and tactics that can help you engage more newer, bigger audiences and increase revenue at theaters. So the first idea is, how can you amplify your content to build brand loyalty? And as you heard from Charity, visitors prefer your theater experience, but they aren't necessarily aware of what you have to offer. You have this relationship with them that's kind of unique, especially for the people who come to you and come to you frequently. So how can you build on that relationship and really take advantage of that opportunity to boost awareness of your brand overall? And then the other thing is, don't assume they'll look again. It's really easy for us to assume that we can talk to the same audiences over and over, and that because they've engaged with us, they'll be interested in engaging it with us again. And that's true to a certain extent, but there's also this opportunity for that audience to grow and change over time. And so some of our speakers will be talking about ideas across email, social media, and on-site audience engagement that help you grow and implement new ideas to address all of these, okay? As Charity mentioned, your potential visitors sometimes can't find you, especially those who've never visited before. And so there's a huge opportunity, as Charity mentioned, with Google search to help people who don't really have awareness of your theaters to be able to find you. And so we've invited Mary Hartman from Hennepin Marketing to talk about search engine marketing. We also have Brian Siddle from Strong Coffee Marketing to talk about social media and how you can utilize that to help. So you'll be hearing from those folks today about ways that you can get in front of those people who are looking. When it comes to signs, more is not better. So, they have to be visible and they have to be impactful, but sometimes we notice that they are in places that are distracting, And so the moral of the story is, if you could get hit by a car looking at a sign, it's probably not the right place for it, right? So, but I know it's an extreme example, but think about it. If somebody looking at a sign interferes with a box office line, or if somebody looking at a sign disrupts traffic flow. Like, those are all things that affect experience, both for the person who's trying to get the information and the people around them. So when you think about signage, how can you make them the most impactful they can be in the places where visitors are naturally looking for that information? So you'll hear ideas about this sprinkled throughout presentations today. So keep an ear open for that. Okay. We really want to encourage you to arm your staff with personal experiences and content knowledge. And this is happening in different ways everywhere, right? It's not that people aren't doing this, it's that they aren't doing enough of it. And that maybe not in the ways that your frontline staff need. And in many instances, your frontline staff are younger, maybe part-time. So having a single staff preview event, for example, might be hard to get everybody there because of your, budget and hours and all that stuff. So what are the creative ways that we could engage those frontline staff who really have the power to increase revenue more than anybody in this room, right? They're the ones who have the power. So how can we give it to them? So we'll be talking a lot about that today to help you find ways to do that. Okay, then finally, it's really hard to see the forest and the trees, right? And what we mean is we all have target audiences. We all have demographics that we use to put our marketing plans together, to choose our films, to collaborate with museum marketing departments and figure out what our overlap is in those audiences. And those are all helpful things. But there's also this growing opportunity that we have to address, which is audience is no longer a static thing. We can't define our audience in one way, because if we do that, we're doing it to the exclusion of all others. And that has to do with demographics, it has to do with interests, just across the board. If you aren't thinking about your audience on a film-by-film basis, you are leaving money on the table. So if you are thinking about defining your audience differently, we have some amazing speakers today who are going to talk about that. Jody Harris is going to talk about finding audiences in your existing lists and building audience personas to help you do that. Doug Harris is here from Kaleidoscope Group, who will talk about diversity and expanding your audiences from that perspective. And we'll also be throughout the day talking about audience engagement as a major theme because we feel like this is the biggest area and opportunity for you to grow.